All right, at this time here on the 757 at 6, we are joined by a special guest. You know him from the David Glenn Show. He's the founding editor of the ACC Sports Journal. ACCsports.com is the website for that, and he contributes to The Athletic Carolina, theathletic.com. We say hello to our pal David Glenn. It's been a while since we had him here on the 757 at 6, and thank you so much for coming on. A summer and an August unlike any other we've experienced before, huh?
You're not overstating it at all, Matt. It's good to be with you again. I've been around. I'm going to turn an ugly number on the other side of 50 a little bit later this month, and I can promise you in my half century plus, I've never seen anything like this in the sports world or otherwise.
Well, listen, as long as you look as good as Leonard Hamilton, who's celebrating a birthday today, he doesn't look at all what his age is, you'll be okay.
Thanks, bud. Yeah, I wish I had those kind of bloodlines, man. He does look about my age, right? And what is he, 70 now?
He just turned 72 today, but he doesn't look a day over 42, I think. So
it's impressive.
Well, we'll dig into some basketball with you before we let you run here in a bit. But let's start off with, of course, then you followed and covered the ACC for years. Did you like what the conference did a week ago with the 10+1 model that they have laid out for football and the inclusion of Notre Dame to be eligible for the league's title game?
Yeah, I'm okay with it. I think it is aggressive, right? I mean, 11 games is only one less than a typical season, if you want to look at it that way. But I understood what they did with Notre Dame. They are going to get, remember, some of that NBC Sports TV money. The Irish had to give up something to get something. But Notre Dame was in a predicament, right? And whereas some were saying ACC Commissioner John Swofford should have sort of held the independent in football Irish over a barrel and somehow used the leverage to, force them to make a decision about full-time football membership. I think the ACC culture is more friends help friends at times of strife. So Notre Dame gave a little, the ACC gave a little, the Irish have their full 10-game conference schedule. If they manage to be one of the two best teams, they will play, in all likelihood, Clemson for the ACC title. So there was a lot of compromise involved. They, of course, they described everything as only an outline, right? And said, hey, only if public health guidance allows are we going to move forward with this 11-game approach. With that in mind, I understood why they did it that way, although it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that they were expecting the SEC to do the same, 10+1. And they were a little bit surprised when the SEC decided to just stick to conference games, and that means 4 really popular ACC versus SEC football rivalries will not be played this year. And the Gamecocks against the Tigers has been played every year since 1908. So some traditions are going to fall by the wayside, as so many other things have done that here during the pandemic.
Yeah, it's just wild to think. And before we get more into that, do you think this opens the door for Notre Dame to be in the ACC for football beyond this coming season?
It won't happen anytime soon because of that NBC TV contract. A lot of folks don't realize that in all the major conferences, TV deals are struck with a whole league, and then, of course, they divvy up among the schools their slices of the pie, if you will. Notre Dame doesn't share the NBC Sports money unless it's an unusual situation like this. So as long as the Irish remains prominent in football, as they have been under Brian Kelly, that means they're going to be a hot TV property. So as long as NBC Sports keeps renewing at a high mega $1 million level, I think the Irish sees that football independence as so central to its entire athletic department's culture that they're going to ride that wave a lot longer. I do remind people that the Irish are contractually bound by their agreement with the ACC, and this is pre-pandemic. If they choose to join a conference at any time, I believe it's in the next decade or so, it must be the Atlantic Coast Conference. I just don't think it's going to happen anytime soon because of those other factors still in play, and the Irish really enjoying that unique relationship they have with NBC right now.
We all love to look at schedules, whether it's the prep, the college, the pro level, and we like to circle what's going to happen with the schedules. And we know that things are very much up in the air with this pandemic, whether we start on time or have a season and all those things. But, Dave, as you looked at the rescheduled schedule that came out last week, is there a big winner, big loser? And I don't like to say loser, but a team that's going to have really a tougher road ahead as you look at things now.
Yeah, the two that jumped out at me, Matt, at the opposite ends of the spectrum. On the one side, NC State is the only ACC football team that will avoid both Clemson, which of course is a preseason among the favorites for the national title, as usual, and Notre Dame, which is a preseason top 10 team in a lot of people's eyes. Only the Wolfpack avoids both the Irish and the Tigers. So that was good news for Dave Doran and NC State. I'd say at the other end of the spectrum, Pitt looks like it has a chance to be a pretty good football team, but the Panthers face, among others, Notre Dame, Louisville, and Virginia Tech all at home. And they have to visit Clemson and Florida State and Miami. So those are six, arguably six of the best teams. They're kind of top half of the ACC football teams in the projections, all six of them. And in this revised schedule, Pat Narduzzi and the Panthers have to face all six. So that was not the way you wanted to see that cookie crumble if you're a Pitt fan.
And a Panthers team that's going to really rely on that pass rush, which is helped headed up by one of our local products in Patrick Jones, who started at Grassfield High School in Chesapeake. We're talking with David Glenn from the ACC Sports Journal, ACCSports.com, and the Athletic Carolina. It's the 757 at 6 on ESPN Radio 94.1. Give David a follow on Twitter at David Glenn Show, also at ACC Sports for everything with the ACC Sports Journal, whether you're a fan of Virginia Tech, UVA, or someone else in the ACC. And let's go to one of those in-state schools here making news, David, and that's Virginia Tech. We know about Caleb Farley opting out, really becoming the first big name in the league or around the country to do so, and he cited health and safety concerns, even going on to say that, quote, "One day I looked around and we're like 100 deep in our indoor facility, no masks," end quote. A big picture, how significant of a loss is it for that Tech defense?
That's a really big deal. I mean, obviously, in the whole ACC, you would start with guys like Trevor Lawrence at Clemson. That quarterback is projected to be the number one overall NFL pick in 2021. And there are a handful of others. But when you make a short list of the very best defensive players in the entire Atlantic Coast Conference, Caleb Farley is on that list. And he is a possible first-rounder. You look up some stats from last year, Matt. It was unbelievable. The opposing quarterback's passer rating when they were targeting Caleb Farley was in the 20s. For those who don't follow such things, if the opposing quarterbacks simply threw the ball into the dirt on every snap, they would have a passer rating of about 40. So it drops to 27 roughly when you go after Caleb Farley. I mean, I don't know what number I could possibly give you that emphasizes it's more dangerous to throw at Caleb than it is to spike the ball into the dirt. That's what the metrics say, as insane as that sounds. So, yes, it's a big deal. I mean, that Virginia Tech, anybody would want to be able to tilt its defense knowing that at least one of its corners was truly the shutdown guy in the college sense of that word. So it's not like the Hokies are going to just crumble without him, but I would say he is one of the most important defensive players in the entire ACC.
Well, and Justin Fuente had big shoes to fill when he came in after Frank Beamer. We know this is the beginning without Bud Foster as the architect of that defense, and it's strange. He's an interesting study because if they were to get to the ACC championship game, and granted it's a much tougher road with Notre Dame being in the league to see presumptive a Clemson, if you will, or whoever, he could be ACC Coach of the Year. But is the phrase hot seat fair to throw at Justin Fuente going into this year?
That's an interesting question, especially during a pandemic. Obviously, Virginia Tech is or was one of the more prominent programs in the entire country for much of that Frank Beamer era. And as he trended downward, even the legendary Frank Beamer got a little bit of heat. When you're Justin Fuente and you have to follow one of the most famous figures in the history of Virginia Tech athletics, and you start well, as he did, but then you start trending downward, you're not going to get the same benefit of the doubt or the same, long leash that Frank Beamer got and earned, even amidst those struggles at the end of his tenure. So 19 wins in his first 2 years, including a trip to the ACC title game for Justin Fuente, 19 wins combined, of course. And then he had the losing campaign, did bounce back to 8-5 last year. Maybe it's a stretch to say it's automatically a hot seat if he has another middling season, but they're proud enough about their football program at Virginia Tech that if he somehow bottomed out in year 5, yes, then I think that the disaster scenario, but probably only that, would put him on the hot seat.
There's so much going on in the world of college sports, David, here during the pandemic. Goodness, we talked about a little bit there, the SEC's decision, the Pac-12, and then you got the Pac-12 football player boycott, all unusual circumstances and times here, and no ACC basketball tournament to finish, no NCAA basketball tournament this year for the first time in our lifetime. With all that in mind, which sport is in a more tenuous or fragile spot, be it ACC-wise or in general at the college level, football or basketball?
I'd say it has to be football because, as we've already seen, football, in most cases, pushing back the starting date until mid-September, in some leagues all the way to the end of September. What does that do? It buys you time. It buys university presidents time to see what happens. I have a high school senior daughter who's about to enroll in college for the first time. We're dropping her off a week from today. These university settings are going to change dramatically from what they were in the summer to what they're about to be in the fall, even if they're not at full enrollment. And that plays into athletics, with football being on the front burner. I mean, teams are practicing. Games are not too far away in many cases. That puts you, in my eyes, even more at risk. Whereas basketball, it's still a few months away. They could even push back the start date if they have to, based on how the science evolves. And they could push it all the way into 2021 in a worst-case scenario. Who knows? Maybe we have a vaccine by then. Maybe basketball has something to lean on scientifically in a way that football does not right here in August. So I'd say in that sense, football is more vulnerable, and that's scary for a lot of athletic directors because at most schools, football pays the majority of the bills.
I think with all that's going on this year, we're all at the point where nothing really surprises us or shocks us anymore. But I'll throw it to you, David. And we had the comments from Coach K a couple weeks ago that the NCAA cannot survive missing the NCAA tournament 2 years in a row. Would you be more surprised if there are no out-of-league games, no season, no NCAA tournament at all? What would be most surprising when it comes to the sport of basketball for you?
I would be surprised if there's no NCAA tournament at all because, it's kind of like, I guess, an example would be the NHL, right? They had an unprecedented long delay without those regular season games. What did they decide to preserve? The Stanley Cup playoffs. Mm-hmm. They didn't preserve anything else. They went right into this unique, supersized playoff format. I don't think college basketball would necessarily, be pushed to that extreme. But if anything is going to be saved, it is that cash cow that we call the NCAA tournament. The NCAA, a lot of folks don't know, it's something in the neighborhood of 90% of the NCAA's annual revenue, and I mean in all sports, comes down to a single event, the NCAA men's basketball tournament. So if anything is going to be preserved, hopefully after a solid, regular season, however long that might turn out to be, that cash cow, March Madness, is going to be the first thing to be preserved.
I'll get you on this one, and I appreciate the time and look forward to getting you back on the show here down the road, David. We see the success that the NBA is having, the NHL is having with the bubble. You see very few people testing positive. We see the struggles Major League Baseball is having, not in a bubble. College football can't be in a bubble here. What's your feeling on? I mean, there's people that say if you have that stopping point or pausing point, there's no picking it back up. How do you kind of see this playing out right now here on August the 4th?
Man, I try to be an optimist. It's hard to be an optimist with some of the COVID trends lately. And I'll say this, people in even better position than I am as I speak to you are divided close to 50-50. And I mean athletic directors, people who talk to medical professionals, who talk to scientists and doctors, sometimes on their own campuses. Half the ADs I know think there's going to be something close to a full football season or maybe a full that 11-game schedule in the ACC's example. Others think that even though things are started, even if the opener is played, they just foresee a lot of things going wrong. And university presidents getting upset by, negative headlines or who knows, maybe even a tragedy. When athletic directors are split 50-50, it feels like the old saying, your guess is as good as mine, Matt. The optimist in me says this season is going to be played. But I have to admit that the medical professionals are not nearly as optimistic right now as they were maybe a month or two ago.
We're all keeping our fingers and toes crossed because we'd love to have some college football, college basketball, and the ACC and beyond for this coming year. He's David Glenn, The David Glenn Show. Make sure you follow ACCsports.com. Get the ACC Sports Journal. You can also order a copy of the ACC Tournament Basketball Handbook, the best of the best, looking back at a historical run going to 1954. And he also does work for The Athletic, theathletic.com. Thank you so much. You stay safe and be well, and we'll keep in touch, all right?
Right back at you, my friend. Take care.